So let's just keep talking terrain. What type of terrain do guides choose to go? That's sort of the most interesting question I'm interested in right now. From an avalanche research perspective, we want to characterize the terrain in a meaningful way for guiding decisions, as Brandon just showed. So we want to capture those terrain features that matter to the guides, that drive those terrain choices. From an operational perspective, terrain classes can serve as risk management tools. They can help facilitate communicating the severity one is comfortable skiing in. The avalanche terrain exposure scale would offer that and has been widely applied in the recreational setting, but has been found to be way too conservative in professional heli skiing. So for instance, Northern Escape is working with an adapted terrain classification system based on the ideas of AIDS. They classified their terrain according to the avalanche severity into green, blue, and black lines. Another example is CMH, who had all or most of their runs in all their lodges classified into simple A, B, and C rating system in the mid-80s to the mid-90s, according to personal judgment of the guiding team at those operations. But despite those efforts, there's not much traction of terrain classification system within the industry. And there's no classification system out there that would allow us to make the link between the terrain choices and the hazard and describe the terrain in a comprehensive way. Operations have developed an intimate knowledge of their terrain, and this operational knowledge goes way beyond just the pure, simple topographical factors such as incline measured in degrees, as Brandon just showed. And it includes more than just the hazard factors. In fact, we get a more comprehensive picture of the terrain of a ski run if we include also the rewards that the run has to offer and the barriers that might exist. Most operations have a finely but implicit sort of hierarchy of their ski runs that has evolved around those terrain characteristics and includes the terrain, but also the snow and avalanche climate, local practices, and the attended skiing product that it tried to provide. So what I will do is to show you an application of how we can use such a vocabulary in describing runs in a more meaningful way and get to the terrain hierarchies of such operations. So I'll draw examples from Northern Escape heli skiing and CMH Galena, where Roger, respectively Claire, characterized the runs in their tenure according to the survey that Brandon just showed. So as you see from those two photos, these operations have quite different type of terrain that they work with. This word cloud illustrates what Claire characterized the runs in his tenure. So basically, the bigger the size of the text, the more frequent he used that terrain characterization. The other factor is the color, so green again for the benefits that this terrain piece has to offer, and red, the hazard that exists on that run. So we see most of the terrain at Northern Escape heli skiing is in the alpine, mainly non-glaciated slopes. They have also many open slopes at treeline. They have glade skiing, quite a bit of glaciated alpine skiing. But it also goes down to open canopy snow forest skiing below treeline. Many of the ski runs are gentle. They have no exposure to avalanche slopes or only minor exposure to avalanche slopes, and are perceived as very friendly. On the other hand, CMH Galena, known for its deep tree skiing, many open slopes at tree line, many avalanche paths, snow forest, large slopes, unfriendly places, steep pitches, or even sustained steep runs. So given that those two operations have such different type of terrain, how can we possibly derive a terrain classification that would be meaningful for both of them? Here's how. Imagine an operation with those 24 ski runs, or imagine your operation, the ski runs of your operation. They all have a different character. Some are those large, sustained avalanche slopes, some are below tree line, some are at tree line. And while they all have different characteristics, they might be treated in a similar way by that operation. And we can simply make two groups on any given day based on the run list data. Two groups, one is open on that day, the other one was closed on that day. And then we might do that not only for one day, but let's say for multiple days, a season, or even multiple seasons. And over time, groups emerge out of those run list decisions. And we might get, in our example, 3 groups of ski runs that are treated similarly. So group 1, basically always open, and a group 3, only rarely open, and maybe also just open towards the end of the season. So fundamentally, those groups of ski runs represent the operational knowledge that this operation has developed over time. And it should lead us to a meaningful characterization. So let's come back to data from Northern Escape. We've used the run list data for 5 winter seasons, included 59 ski runs of their most frequently used zone, Promised Land. That's data for over 400 days and roughly 25,000 decision points. So no issue with sample size. We identified a hierarchy of 6 groups of runs that were treated similarly over those 5 years. As we've seen, first group almost always open, and then it goes down to a group number 6, which is only rarely open, less than a third of the time. For CMH Galena, 11 winter seasons, over 200 ski runs included, 1,200 days, and short of 300,000 decision points of opening and closing a run. We identified 7 groups. Same pattern, a group that is almost always open, and then a group that is rarely open. So let's have a look at group number 1 of Northern Escape, which is almost always open. Those are the gentle, very friendly ski runs. No avalanche slopes. What's interesting is all elevation bands, so that it's below tree line, it's at tree line, it even has glaciated sections on it. They were characterized as safe and accessible ski runs. Bread and butter runs, and providing a good skiing experience for the guests. On the other end of the spectrum, the group that was mostly closed, as expected. Terrain gets more severe, so unfriendly places, the few unfriendly places that they have, the large slopes, sustained steep ski runs and basically limited to the alpine. They're rarely skied, but they provide a good or even a very good experience for the guest. Then CMH, the group that's always open. Similar characteristics, how they use it, characterizes bread and butter runs, provide good experience, are safe and accessible for the operation, are moderately steep, are friendly, but also have steep pitches. Some of them are sustained steep, and many of them have multiple small slopes, so slopes that are capable of producing up to size 2.5 avalanches. It's kind of striking at first, but then on the other hand, CMH skis those runs very frequently and can have them open way more often than we would expect by just simply looking at topographical factors. Then on the other end of the spectrum, group number 7, those are the scary places, sustained steep and large slopes. At tree line, many of them have avalanche path, regular overhead hazard to the ski line, unfriendly, most of them even very unfriendly places, but they provide very good or even exceptional skiing experiences. So while avalanche severity increases within the hierarchy of CMH Galena, we clearly see that it's not the only thing. We also see that accessibility clearly decreases. Roger characterized many of those runs that conditions to get to those runs by helicopter need to line up or even be perfect. And many of the pickup locations are threatened by regular overhead hazard. So they might not be discussed as frequently just because they're not accessible. So to conclude, we've seen that we can derive operation-specific terrain classes by simply not actually doing the grouping on the terrain, but doing the grouping on decision, how those operations have repeatedly coded runs historically. And it's basically just terrain classes that have been in practice by that operation already. And we can do it in a high resolution, so we're not limited to just the 3 classes that are applied so far. From a research perspective, we get a more comprehensive picture of terrain in those groups if we do not limit ourselves to just the hazard or just topographical factors, as we've seen with the example for the accessibility. And we have now a foundation to make the link to the hazard, so we can go back and look at the conditions when those large and steep slopes were actually rarely open and when they were skied. Then from a operational perspective, it simply provides an insight over past decisions. It's pattern in past decision making that can help a new guide familiarize with the terrain that is at that operation, and it can be used as a platform for mentorship. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Reto? All right, very interesting. Thank you.